Hello, AAD workers. My name is Cara Munro. Welcome to today's narrated PowerPoint presentation, Navigating Complex Care Teams, Strategies for Victorian AAD Workers. I'd love to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm zooming in from today, and also acknowledge that wherever you're viewing this from, that you're also on traditional lands. I'm here on the lands of the people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd love to pay my respects to their elders, past elders, present elders, and the emerging elders, the young people who will be the elders of the future. For today's session, we take a bit of a leap. We've been talking so far in our class about communication skills working with various individuals, but today we're actually going to talk about the dynamics that are present when you as an AAD worker work with an entire group of people. And you might think, but I'm an AAD worker, I'm working one-to-one usually. That's actually not the case. A vast majority of your time as an AAD worker is going to be spent in groups. It could be with clients, it will often be with other professionals. And actually, when you're working with a group, you've got not only the individuals involved and the dynamics that they bring, but you've got the group as a whole. It creates its own entity. And you'll know this because you personally in your own life, you will have been part of groups where there's an overall feeling of cohesion, of togetherness. The group, when people come together and are present together, the group has an incredible feel to it, and it's functional and it's productive, and it's got its vibe, it's got a life of its own. At the same time, groups can have an energy or a life of their own, which can be really dysfunctional, it can be really toxic. And today, what we're going to look at is working not just with individuals in a group, but working with actually that entire group itself. And particularly, we're going to pay attention to some of the common things that happen in the AAD sector that AAD workers report experiencing, and some really practical tips and strategies as to how to overcome these things. They're all overcomeable. You wouldn't think it when things go on and on and on for ages. It can feel very stuck and seem like it can't be fixed, but actually there are some really concrete steps that you can take once you recognise what's going on. Before we get into that though, this slide's just talking about the types of groups that you as an AAD worker may find yourself being part of and find yourself also facilitating and leading. So on the left-hand side, we've got groups that involve clients. So it could be a drug education group, a support group. There could be family members, like a support group especially for family members. There could be recreational groups where you've got an entire van full of people that you're taking out and you're going to do something together. And managing the dynamics of that sort of group. It's not in a room with chairs in a circle, it's out in the world, and that has its own dynamics of itself. And I've put down the bottom here something that happens a lot for youth drug and alcohol workers is you're asked to deliver drug education sessions in schools. That's a really common one. Likewise, if you're working in a therapeutic community, you might be leading a drug education session or a mindfulness session or some other sort of therapeutic intervention with a group of people. On the right-hand side, we've got the groups that we're going to be focusing on today. So whilst the left-hand side ones, they involve clients and there's a real therapeutic purpose to the group, many of the groups that AAD workers are part of will be groups of other professionals. So I've got here team meetings that can just be in your organisation with the other AAD workers and your manager who all work for the same organisation with the same policies, processes and the same clients. You've also got, I love these ones, group supervision and reflective practice. That's another type of group meeting, very different tone, very different agendas and goals. And then we move down into, we've got a whole spattering of different things that you might be involved in. Care team meetings that we'll focus on today, and I'll come back to that. Organisation-wide team meetings where there's people from other parts of your org that you might be gathering together to plan to organise something. Training meetings, working groups and committees, they'll often be focused around a particular issue. So there might be a particular issue or topic that a group of AAD workers or other professionals are pulled together to work on, troubleshoot, plan for. You might be involved in groups that focus around service delivery, or even focused around tackling an issue in the community that's come up and that there needs to be an AAD response to. This happens quite a bit as well. In the previous slide, I mentioned something called a care team, and that is the type of group that this presentation will be focusing on today. The skills, the common barriers and tensions that I'm going to talk about today actually apply to many of the groups that you'll be working in. And likewise, the skills for overcoming them are really transferable. So although we'll be sort of narrowing down and focusing on one type of group that AAD workers commonly find themselves in, rest assured that if you really engage with this content, it'll set you up well to work with many of the future groups that you find yourself part of. So you'll remember in the two columns of types of groups that AAD workers work with, I spoke about there's groups that are focused around therapeutic interventions with clients. So you're an AAD worker, you're working with a group of clients or clients and family members, or there are groups that you're part of which will be working with other professionals. So there could be other AAD workers, or very often it will be a multidisciplinary team. That's meaning when we say multidisciplinary, we mean professionals who come from different professional backgrounds. So there could be nurses, doctors, psychologists, housing workers, social workers, youth workers. They'll be coming from different training, different background, and when we use the term interagency, when we talk about workers coming from actually different organisations, so you don't all have the same boss, you don't all have the same manager, you don't all have the same structure or policies and procedures that you're working from. You have the same laws that govern you. However, the way that different laws are implemented within organisations can differ slightly, right? So when you're working in an interagency team, you've got to bear in mind that different people have different accountabilities, and you're all coming together and you're trying to do work together. Now, this term care team, you'll hear it a lot, and it's used in a few different ways. For the purposes of today's slideshow, I've just got a bit of a definition for what I'm talking about when I'm referring to care teams. And this is actually, today's presentation actually comes out of some qualitative research that I did with a senior youth drug and alcohol advisor, Rhiannon Bruce. And what we did was we were asked by the Department of Human Services to go around and interview senior drug and alcohol workers who were participating in teams that were multidisciplinary and interagency, meaning the AAD worker was going and meeting with other professionals from other organisations who were all gathered together, and the one thing they had in common was they were all working with the same client. And this client was a person, and they were part of the out-of-home care system, which means that they had been removed from their family and they were living in out-of-home care or in a foster care placement, and they also had substance use. So the team that was supporting them included a drug and alcohol worker. It included workers from the child protection system or the out-of-home care system, and there were also other workers as well. So there might have been a mental health worker, there might have been a doctor, a psychologist, there might have been there might have been a family reunification worker. There could be any number of people who are all collected together in this one team, and their goal is to support this young person to maintain their placement, so maintain their home environment that they've been placed in, maintain that family unit that's been that's there supporting them. Okay, so you can imagine this type of team with these type of professionals gathering together is often fraught with complexity. And these type of teams can be an incredible source of support for the young person who's overcoming substance use and also, overcoming a whole heap of other stuff as well. This team can be a really solid backbone for them that really supports them over many years of their life, or it can be really dysfunctional and have lots of infighting and conflicting ideas and that sort of thing. And so the recognition that it can be really hard for drug and alcohol workers to navigate this team and to represent drug and alcohol work within these teams. There can be a lot of unique challenges. Because that was recognised, this qualitative research project was commissioned, and myself, Miranda and Bruce were asked to interview workers who had a lot of experience in these sort of teams and draw out key themes as to what's going on, what are the common problems that they face, and also identify some really practical strategies and solutions. The teams that were working well, why were they working well? The AAD workers who found they were really able to have a meaningful contribution to these teams and make really significant strides and have a really positive impact on a young person's substance use. What were the key ingredients? What was going on there? What helped and supported that work? So I spent about a year going around interviewing AAD workers and putting together this research, and I'm going to share with you some of the findings, some of the important points that are really relevant to your study today. Throughout this narrative PowerPoint, I've included some quotes from senior drug and alcohol workers who participated in the study and share their wisdom and their expertise. And just starting off here with two quotes from some really senior drug and alcohol workers about what they see the role of a care team is. So, time to get to the juicy bit, the common issues, and then what we're going to do is we're going to track through to some solutions and some key strategies that you can use in your own practice. So I want you to bear in mind that I'm not going to be presenting all of the research findings today. It was quite a comprehensive project. Some of the barriers and tensions that we found when we analysed what all these senior youth drug and alcohol workers had said about their experience working in care teams. Here are some of the barriers and tensions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip through these. You're welcome to chat to me about this after class, but I'd like to focus on the 4 really big ticket topics that kept coming up again and again and again, and the ones that I feel are most relevant for you at this moment in your career and in your practice. And so these are the top 4, and I'm going to go into more detail about how to overcome these and what they actually mean in upcoming slides. But we've got unsafe group culture is a massive one. Splitting rather than collaborating with professionals who have different perspectives. The needs of the system overshadowing the needs of the client. And I'm going to go into what that means just in a little bit. And this is a kind of, it's a sad one. It's one that came up again and again and again, and it's a reality, and it's something that I want to make you aware of so you can preempt it and you can refute it. And that is stigma and mistrust towards AAD workers from other professionals. It came up in many of the interviews as a really big barrier that prevented AAD workers from having a really meaningful contribution in these interprofessional meetings. So you know what the key barriers and tensions are, and now let's talk about some strategies to overcome them. So unsafe group culture. Talking about unsafe group culture, it can feel like a little bit of a buzzword, and it can seem, it can easily be something that sort of goes over your head and think, oh, what does that mean? That doesn't really seem relevant to me. But I'm sure that all of you will have had an experience where you've been in been with a group of people. It could be a social setting, it could be a work setting, professional setting, where you just haven't felt safe to be yourself, to speak out. You haven't felt safe to say what you genuinely think and believe. You felt inhibited. You felt like if you truly let people know who you are, there might be some repercussions. You might be shamed, you might be mocked, or there might be some other sort of repercussions. You might be somehow shut down. And perhaps nothing's really gone wrong. There's not, people aren't throwing chairs across the room or doing crazy stuff like that. But there's just a feeling that you have inside yourself that this is not really an environment where it's safe for me to really show who I am and really share anything of myself. And you can feel quite guarded in that environment. Sometimes unsafe group cultures are outwardly hostile, where people are rude to one another, or there's really poor behavior going on. But more often than that, it will be a little bit more subtle, and you might not even, register consciously why you're not speaking up much. But when you leave that environment, you sort of notice yourself heave a bit of a sigh of relief that you can go back to being yourself again. So when we talk about unsafe group culture, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a group environment and a group culture where people aren't really safe to be themselves, and they're not really thriving. And this is really problematic in a professional context. Think about a group that is designed to come together to support an AAD client. You've got all these people with different fields of knowledge, with different expertise in the room. They could all be potentially chiming in, chipping in to troubleshoot issues or to support the client really proactively. But if they're holding back and they're not sharing what they know, they're not sharing from their experience, then the client is really going to be disadvantaged by that sort of scenario. So what do you do about it? Well, it can be really tricky when there's an unsafe group culture and it's been going on for some time. It's become entrenched. So, prevention is always better than cure. And if you're someone who is in a position where you're establishing a group, you're leading a group, you're facilitating it, then establishing an environment that's emotionally safe from the beginning is absolutely key. And I've actually got some resources I'll direct you to after this PowerPoint, which specifically talk about breaking down how to do that. And it's surprisingly simple. It's often overlooked, but there are things that you can do to just start it out safe, okay? And that's your gold standard of what would be ideal. It's not always possible to be there in the beginning and to start a group culture with safety as a consideration from the early onset. And we can talk a little bit later about what to do when you're entering a group that is unsafe, but you're entering it midstream. Okay, that will be covered later on in the session. So how do we establish a safe group culture? I've got 3 things here, and actually if you've been in my class since the beginning, you will be familiar with all of these. I am very, very, very committed to all of them and talking about them at all times. Cultural safety practices. So we've spoken at length about this. The same power dynamics that exist in the wider community, sexism, racism, other forms of discrimination, they happen to be present when groups of professionals meet together as well, right? So it's really important to establish cultural safety in professional groups that you're working in. The window of tolerance model. Often when you're attending a professional team, people might have come from, they might have already had 3 meetings that day. They might have been in court that morning with a client. They might have had a really stressful, event that's just occurred. They haven't had lunch yet, and they're rushing to get a car park, and they're here now, and they're frazzled. Remembering the window of tolerance and remembering that, we're all vulnerable to slipping outside of our window, either jumping up above it or dropping down below it, and bringing these strategies that you're always sharing with clients, bringing them to your teamwork with other professionals as well. They're really effective. And the third point here, which is a really beautiful one, this came through in quite a few of the interviews with senior AD workers. Role model vulnerability. Now, what this is about is when you're meeting with other professionals, often people can put on a facade. They want to be seen as super professional and they've got it together and they know everything and they're an expert. And there can be a lot of ego involved, and also there can be fragility involved as well. If you're feeling a bit unsure about yourself in your role, you can, sort of be inclined to act like you've got it all together and not be honest about misgivings you may have, or things that you don't know, or areas where you don't feel confident. One of the beautiful things about working in a team is we can support one another, where one person has an area where they don't feel very confident, another person in the team, that might be a real strength of theirs. So the whole purpose of having a team is that we can all complement each other. But unfortunately, this isn't going to work if everyone is acting like they know everything and not actually, they're too afraid of sort of being human and actually speaking out about the things where they're not sure. There are ways to role model vulnerability that don't undermine your professionalism, that actually enhance it, that show you to be a person who has good self-awareness, who is professional and competent. And part of that professionalism is you know what you're not very good at yet, and you know where you need the help and support of the group. And so this is a skill that really has to be developed over time, and it can feel very scary to practice it, but it's something that you can be practicing now with your colleagues in class, in your small groups, with your fellow students. Practice role modeling vulnerability. And I've got here a quote: being aware of your skill base, it's okay to say, I haven't got much experience in that, so I'm not the right person to follow that up. Who in the room has? So I really encourage you to experiment with vocalizing the limitations of what you know and what you don't know, and in a professional manner. And the thing is, when you do this, when someone does this, it immediately creates a sense in the room that other people feel safe to do the same thing. And so the conversation that we have becomes a lot more honest and a lot more genuine, and we can actually get to supporting the client much quicker. We cut through a lot of the crap, and we can actually, really start to work out who's best placed to do this part of the work, where we need to step up, and how we need to support one another. So it can have a profound impact on the effectiveness of the team as a whole, but it takes courage. And finally, this is a really simple and practical suggestion, and it's about considering the physical environment that you're in, and that can actually improve the sense of safety. And you'll all know, you've all been in a situation where, you're trying to have a conversation with someone and there's a door coming open and closed. You're trying to have a private, important conversation. There's people walking through, or it's crowded, or, you clam up, right? It's not possible. It doesn't feel safe. We as humans naturally do that. So when you're meeting together as a group of professionals, consider the physical space. Obviously, we would never want to meet with professionals in an environment that's not confidential, but there are other considerations as well that can actually enhance the feeling of safety, or they can diminish it. I've got a beautiful quote from a senior AAD nurse here, and she was talking about an experience she had traipsing through DHHS, that's Department of Health and Human Services, traipsing through DHHS, swiping through locked doors with no windows. We should be sitting down there with scones. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, I noticed it was a bit tense last time. I just thought I'd do something different this time. Here are some Arnott's all sorts. But it's hard to do that. everyone's got workloads and tension and trauma and fear. So that was a really beautiful quote to include. Think about the things that you can do to bring a little bit more humanness to your meetings. They can have a profound impact. I'm going to take us through to the second point now, which is a really big issue that comes up that AD workers talk about all the time, and it's the needs of the system overshadowing the needs of the client. And now this is big and it's complex, and we're not going to cover all of it today. But basically what it means is we work for drug and alcohol organisations in a drug and alcohol sector, in a health sector, and we work with AAD clients, and often what the client is needing will be different to what our managers need us to do, what their managers need them to do, what the whole system is pressurizing us to get done. And this tension is there all the time, and it can show up in different ways. And for those of you who've been AOD clients, you will, I'm sure that you'll nod and you'll resonate with this. There'll be times when what you were asking of your worker was really clear and specific and you knew what you needed, but there were all these barriers that seemed to be getting in the way, preventing them from being able to support you in that way, preventing that from happening. It can be resourcing, it can be policies, it can be any number of things. When you meet with a team of other professionals, this shows up in a few different ways. One of the ways it shows up is you meet together, and rather than talking about the client and the client's plan, the client's goals, people start debriefing. They start talking about the stress of their week. They start talking about a situation that's unfolding that they're really panicked about. They start talking about another client. They start talking about a conflict they've got going on with their manager, that it's sort of, it becomes like an emotional vomit. And, sometimes what will happen is you're part of a team where every time you meet, this happens. It's not just a one-off, and it becomes kind of like the routine or the ritual of the group. And people start coming to the group for the purpose of venting their frustration, okay? And so what's that saying? What's going on there? It's speaking to me a few things. One is, whilst this is going on, whilst this professional venting is happening, the worker supporting the client is getting marginalised. It's not getting done. Okay, so the client is missing out. But the other thing is, these professionals who are coming to this group, who are feeling this pent-up need to vent, to talk, to have other people, perhaps from other organisations, to talk about what's going on at their organisation, they themselves have a need for emotional support, for more support, and they haven't been getting it. So they're using this nice meeting with these friendly professionals who are great listeners, who are using active listening skills. They're using this forum to get their emotional needs met. Okay, so that's a big warning sign for me. Another thing that can go on is that meetings become kind of based around a list of things to get through and just sort of ticking boxes. So there isn't really meaningful discussion about the client's needs, about what's going on for the client, about how to really creatively respond to what they're going through at the moment and how to support them as a team. But the meeting kind of becomes about, oh, have you done this? Have you done that? Tick, tick, tick. Oh, we need to do this. And it can become very administrational or very much focused about, this is a term you'll hear a lot, and I'm putting it in inverted commas, I really don't like it, ass covering, which just basically means, as a worker, I'm scared that I'll be told off or I'll get into trouble for what I'm doing or not doing. So therefore, I'm doing this piece of work, I'm writing down some notes, and the thing that's guiding me is not best practice working with AAD clients, but I know that, if I get in trouble, this will be there to protect me. So I'm just doing things just to make sure that I don't get negative repercussions. And people can spend a lot of time box ticking and ass covering because they don't feel safe, they don't feel supported often by their management or their organisation and their teams. And so rather than focusing on looking after the client and working with them, they first and foremost are sort of focusing on keeping themselves safe and making sure that they're not hauled over the coals for doing something or for not doing something. And this can be a really counterproductive way of working. It's also, you know, we have to have compassion for our co-workers if they're in this situation, because it's a horrible way for them to be working as well. So what to do if you encounter this sort of situation where the needs of the system, the needs of the worker or the drug and alcohol organisation are coming first and becoming more important than the actual client's needs? Well, there's some really practical skills and strategies. The first one is bringing an attitude of compassion and non-judgment from your colleagues. If you have, colleagues who are stuck in that box ticking mode or that ask covering mode, and I've got a quote down here. Something that you could ask your colleagues or ask the group, and it's, what are the pressures that you're facing from your superiors and your systems right now? Can we brainstorm some ways that we can share the pressure more evenly? Can you outsource some of the pressure to members of the care team so that the system's needs are met and we can focus on what the young person is saying they need or what the client is saying they need? And something else you might be able to offer is, I feel like there's a tension between our need to debrief and the need to be a care team for the young person or for the client. Has anyone else felt this way? These are sort of some more compassionate approaches that you can try if you want to talk with your team of colleagues about what's going on in the group that you've noticed. Something else, and you'll see this again and again in recommendations for how to run effective groups, is have a clear agenda. An agenda is just a written plan for what you're going to do in the group. Sometimes it has times put next to the different agenda items. A great agenda is one that will be written before the group and sent out to group members, so everyone's coming into the space knowing what to expect. And often there'll be an opportunity for people to contribute to agenda items before the meeting. So, hey, I really want to talk about, harm minimization strategies. So you can just email the person who's organising the agenda and say, can you please include this as an agenda topic? And they'll make sure it's written on the agenda, and there's some time allocated for discussing this, and that it gets sent out to everyone beforehand, so everyone is forewarned. And the next 3 points actually are also all really common strategies for groups, not just in the drug and alcohol sector, but the whole health sector more broadly. Having a person who's leading the group or facilitating the group. Now, that doesn't mean they are the expert that has greater expertise than everyone else, but they're just the person who is tending to the time that you've got together and helping make sure that all the agenda items are discussed and that there's enough time and that the group itself is functioning in a healthy way for that period of time. And if the person who's leading the group or facilitating the group, if they struggle to refocus the group or the group's sort of going off on tangents and that sort of thing, it can be really helpful to also nominate a timekeeper. So this is someone who will work with the leader, and you'll know sometimes when I'm facilitating a class, I certainly go off on tangents, or there are tangents, and it can be so helpful to have someone else in the group, a student or, in this instance, a colleague, someone who's just got their eye on the clock. And when you're facilitating, it can be hard to also keep an eye on the time, how it's all tracking, but having someone who can just say, hey, can we have another 5 minutes on this topic, then move on. Someone who can just keep the pace going. It can really break up that dynamic, especially if people are going into excessive debriefing mode or really getting off track. A timekeeper is a fantastic person to have. I've got a great strategy that I used when I was managing Yoda, and that was I would nominate when I was running a team meeting. The person who was most likely to go off on a tangent and to, lose track of time, I would ask them to be the timekeeper. And it's a fabulous strategy for just keeping the shape of the group in line and making sure you get through everything. It's just a little pointer, something to think about. I'm sad to say that this theme of other professionals having a negative attitude towards AAD workers was a really strong theme in all of the interviews. Many of the senior AAD workers I spoke to reported that they felt like they were sort of on the back foot. They were having to justify their practice and defend what they were doing because other professionals had these negative stereotypes about what AAD workers represented, and they felt like they had to do a lot of hard work to build trust and to overcome that. When we sort of analysed what people had said and started delving a bit deeper into the themes, a few key reasons for this came out. One of them was in groups of professionals, there tended to be a tension between some workers who were catastrophizing drug use and often the AAD worker who could be caught in trying to counterbalance that by minimising the AAD use. So an example could be a group of professionals. There might be, for example, a child protection worker or a family worker who they were there in the group with the purpose of really making sure that children or babies were being protected and were not being exposed to parental substance use. At the same time, in that same group, you might have an AAD worker who they're working with the client who's using substance, who has a baby or who has a small child. That client might have been going really well. They've been, taking urine drug screens and, they haven't been using or they've seriously reduced their use. However, they had one slip up, they had one lapse, and the AAD workers sort of trying to say, hey, it's okay, it's just a little slip up, they're doing really well, they're fine. Whereas the family worker who their priority is to make sure that, that baby or that child is not being cared for by someone who's not capable, they've got alarm bells going off in their mind and they're thinking, oh my goodness, this AAD worker doesn't get it. This AAD worker is really trying to minimise and to, overlook the fact that this parent is using substances again. And I have really big concerns for this child who, has not been in a safe environment or who's been neglected in the past because of substance use. So there can be this huge breakdown between two professionals who are actually both they both have their reasons for thinking the way they do. In the instance of child protection workers, they'll often have reporting requirements where they're mandated to report certain issues of concern, and it can be really tricky when an AAD worker knows this, and so they sort of feel like, if I mention it in the care team that the parent has had a lapse, then it'll get reported and get escalated. Best just to keep it to myself. So there can become this dynamic where the AAD worker is actually hiding important information about how the client is going because they're worried about escalation or about negative repercussions. And so there can be breakdown of trust, there can be feelings of betrayal, and that team that's supposed to be working together to support a client, because of the competing needs and also the competing reporting requirements, they can end up becoming really dysfunctional and sort of, not working together at all and actually working against one another. And that's a really, really difficult situation. So the way I've written that is that, a tension between professionals who minimise versus those who catastrophise substance use. Personal fear can also be a big factor here. You may be working with other professionals who don't have any personal drug use experience themselves. They may have a personal attitude about substance use that is very very black and white. They may perceive that all drug use is really bad and damaging and unhealthy, and they've worked with clients and they've had, they might have had some awful trauma. They might have lost a client who was using substances and passed away, for example. That might colour their whole attitude towards substance use. They might be really anti-substance use. And so if an AOD worker is coming to the care team meeting and talking about harm minimisation approach, they've got to make sure that the other professionals in the team are educated and understand that there's an evidence basis for what the AOD worker is doing. If they don't understand that, then they can just assume, oh my goodness, this AOD worker is, they're rogue. They've gone rogue. They're supporting something that's really dangerous and unhealthy. They're enabling this client to go down a path that's really, really negative. And so the other members of the care team might have total misunderstanding about what the AOD worker is actually doing. And that may cause them to mistrust what the AOD worker is doing, and once again, breakdown of the function of the team. Something else, and I've got a quote here from a senior drug and alcohol consultant, and she alludes to stigma that's felt in care teams that a lot of AOD workers reported to us. The stigma that, and I'm putting this in inverted commas as well because this is totally inappropriate language, but stigma that, all AOD workers are ex-druggies, and look, I feel really uncomfortable talking about this, but it's very true that stigma is definitely alive and well. And unfortunately, some AOD workers can go into care teams and have really relevant life experience that's really pertinent to the work that they're doing. But if that's the only thing that they're talking about and they're sharing the rationale for their interventions based on their own personal experience, then it can make other professionals very suspicious of what they're doing. There are a few other professionals in that team who base their interventions on their own life experience. You don't have a mental health nurse saying, oh, when I struggled with schizophrenia, I tried this medication, it worked really well, that's why I'm recommending it for this client. You don't have a psychologist saying that. You don't have a doctor saying that. They talk about clients and speak about interventions based on evidence, based on international literature, not based on what happened for them and what worked for them. And so they can find it very confusing and very mistrusting when they hear a drug and alcohol worker use their own life experience as the main rationale for what they're doing with a client. So I share this in the spirit of, look, I think all professionals acknowledge that having a lived experience, whether you're a nurse, psychologist, doctor, arts therapist, whoever you are, having a lived experience of what the clients you're working with have gone through is beneficial to your practice. At the same time, we need more than that. It's not enough to be a really well-rounded professional. You need to also have studied hard and worked hard to understand and meet the needs of a wide variety of clients, not just people who are going through the same thing as you. So it's really important for AOD workers to do what they can to overcome this stigma, and a really key way to do that is by using professional language, talking about your interventions based on the evidence, based on good practice, based on theories and frameworks, and not just based on what worked for you. Now, splitting is something that you're going to hear talked about a lot. Splitting is something that happens in teams when rather than working together as a cohesive unit, there are various people in the team, or even sides in the team that they have mistrust for one another, or they're even undermining one another. Splitting most frequently happens in teams who are dealing with high crisis or chronic crisis. So they might be working with clients who have very risky substance use, and they're they're coming to work on a Monday morning and they're a bit worried about what happened on the weekend. Is the client going to be in hospital, or it's something worse, So teams that are constantly dealing with worry and stress, high risk, high crisis, chronic crisis, which is just when there's ongoing, there might be ongoing mental health concerns, ongoing substance use, ongoing family violence. There's just always really high red alert scenarios that just keep happening, and it feels like the team doesn't ever really get a rest. Those are teams that are more vulnerable to splitting between members. Also, something that you may hear of in the AD sector, and I think it's changed. It's slowly changing, but it's certainly been a big thing in previous years, and it's still there now. Is that AD workers and professionals blame clients for splitting, okay? So that they'll say, oh, that client is splitting us. And sort of a little bit, that sort of, that stereotypical idea of, parents getting divorced, and you'll have a child who's getting, lollies from one parent, not the other, they're sort of playing parents off against one another, that sort of thing. It can be sort of a little bit like that. This notion professionals have that the client is actively pitching one professional against the other and trying to get their needs met through a bit of a divide and conquer system, okay? So yes, that definitely goes on. Something that I would say, if you're part of a team where, other professionals are talking about, oh, that client is splitting us, that, that client has trauma and that's one of their characteristics, they're splitting. Something I would say is, yeah, that client's doing a great job to get you to work against one another. However, you're the professionals here. You can't be split unless you want to be split. You have to play an active part in that as well. You have to be aware of that. And, a sort of common scenario will be you're working with a client who you've got great engagement with, you've got great rapport with, and they sort of, and you're also working with professionals who you work with fairly well, and you have no problems with their work. They seem to be doing a good job, but one day your client might pull you aside and say, hey, that psychologist, I had a session with her and she said this and she did that and I felt this and it was really awful. And in your head you sort of start ticking away like, gosh, that sounds really unethical. That sounds like she's an awful psychologist. That's awful practice. And the risk there is, rather than trying to sort of get to the bottom of what might be going on, including, perhaps having a conversation with the psychologist about it, with your colleague, and trying to understand the different perspectives and how this happened. Rather than doing that, you rush to judgment about your colleague and you align yourself with the client with a sort of a bit of I've got here a heroic Lone Ranger mentality. It's sort of like, oh my goodness, that's awful. Don't worry, I would never do that. Don't worry. She should have listened to you. Don't worry, I'll be that person for you. And that can be where splitting occurs, when you just rush to that assumption and align with your client. And although that might seem like the right thing to do in the moment, your client might be really distressed and they might, have some really valid concerns. Ultimately, a breakdown of their support network and splitting between the professionals who are all there to support them is not beneficial for the client. It's not going to do them any good in the long run. of course, it could be that your colleague has really been unprofessional. They've done the wrong thing and they need to be reported to their manager and they need some steps taken, right? That may be a possibility. There are rare occasions when that is the case, in which case you need to follow through. But, even so, rushing to that assumption first and aligning yourself with the client and creating a bit of a them and us it is not going to be helpful, sort of trying to address it with that other professional, or if you feel you can't do that, with a supervisor or a manager, is a far more professional approach. And you can still be there for your client and support them and express, validate their experience and express to them that, oh gosh, if this sounds, really upsetting, and I'm sorry you had that experience. I wonder if there's more to it, if, something else might be going on that we can get some more information about, and so that you can understand why they behaved in that way. There are more tactful ways of addressing it than immediately rushing to take sides and rushing to split a support team. So after all this, you might be thinking, working in a multidisciplinary team, it feels so fraught. It feels like there's so many complexities. There's all these things that can go wrong. There's all these challenges. How am I going to keep in my head all these different, skills and tricks and tips that I need to remember? I'd love to share with you a model that I've used for many years now, and I've found it to be so helpful in working with groups of people, whether it's groups of colleagues or groups of clients or just groups of people in general. And there, you can jump online, you can find all these different theories and frameworks for group work, right? And for working with teams and for creating successful team culture. They're all helpful, they're all fantastic. I'd love to share with you one that's really simple and it's beautiful. It's based on nature as well. And it's something that I like to call an ecosystem approach. And what I've got here is a photo. It's from the Yarra Ranges National Park, and it's you've got tree ferns, you've got really tall gum trees, there's soil, there's sunlight coming through, there's moisture. I'd like to think that there's a little rambling sort of brook river in there somewhere. There'll be animals, there'll be insects, there's the oxygen in the air and all the various other gases that are in the air. And the reason I include this photo is because all of these things are all working together in an ecosystem. And if one of them is unhealthy, for example, if the river is polluted, it's going to affect the trees, it's going to affect the tree ferns, it's going to affect the animals, it's going to affect the animals that eat the leaves of the trees. So in order for the whole ecosystem to be healthy, then all of its various parts need to be healthy. And if one part of the ecosystem is unhealthy, everything else suffers. And I find this an incredibly helpful way of thinking about working with groups. This slide here, it's just a little diagram of an ecosystem, and I just love to read out the points of an ecosystem. And as I'm reading them out, please think about the way groups of humans can function together for maximum efficacy for an AD client. So an ecosystem is a community of organisms and their physical environment. So think about, setting the space and creating an optimum culturally safe environment for a community of people to come and gather and work together. Ecosystems with higher biodiversity tend to be more stable. They cope better with threats and recover faster when things go wrong. And I love to think about teams of people. It can be easier to work with people who are exactly like us, right? Be easier just to work with drug and alcohol workers, female ones in their 40s. I'd find that quite easy. but actually teams are stronger and we get much better results for our clients if there's diversity, if there are different disciplines, different perspectives, different skills, different experience, different access to networks and resources. So when we have all these different, multidisciplinary professionals represented, then it's going to be a much stronger team to support a client. And if something goes wrong, if that client suddenly needs some mental health support, they suddenly need some housing support, they suddenly have a scenario in their life that we as an AOD worker really totally out of our scope, we don't know what to do. If we have a team that has a diverse range of individuals in it, then there's far higher likelihood that there's going to be someone in that team who knows what's needed and can access the right support, the right resources, get them a referral to the right organisation. Yeah. So biodiversity. Got here point number 4. Ecosystems are collaborative and relationship based. And I love thinking about, that trees have relationships to one another and animals in ecosystems relate to one another. I think this ties in so beautifully with the final point that ecosystems are efficient. There's no doubling up of work. A river knows what it does. It gives everyone a drink. A tree knows what it's doing. It gives everyone shade. Roles are really clearly defined. And in a care team where everyone knows what their role is and the whole team knows what that person's role is, then you're not going to have doubling up of work. And ideally, you're going to have support of one another to really thrive in what you're supposed to be doing. And it's going to be a far more efficient team. And when you're collaborating together and you're really leaning on one another to, capitalize on each other's strengths and areas of expertise, it's going to be a far more efficient way of going about supporting a client. And you're going to get so much more work done that's going to benefit them. Another thing I really, really love about an ecosystem approach to working with groups is if something's going wrong in the group, it's not about demonizing one person. And that can frequently happen in the drug and alcohol sector. It's like, oh gosh, that psychologist is so uptight. No, if something's going wrong in an ecosystem, we're all interconnected. And so rather than looking at a person and their behavior and blaming that as a source of problems, look at what might be causing that behavior. Is there something that's a bit out of balance in our whole system? You're going to work in so many groups and be part of so many teams as part of your AOD career. And I really want to encourage you that whilst group work is complex, it's so worthwhile, and the benefits of being part of a functioning team extend beyond the work of that team, and it's really a gift that keeps on giving. Here I've just got a few of the reasons for really persisting and creating functioning teams, and a few of the, I guess, reasons why it's so important to address dysfunction and to reflect on your part in a team and how you can improve its health and the overall health of the team ecosystem. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. If you're interested in this research or you have any questions about contributing to really functional teams in the AOD sector, I'd love to chat to you about it. So do feel free to stick around after class. Thanks so much.